Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit different than what we're used to. It's going to be more of me communicating or speaking to you directly, more of a monologue. But in this video, we will talk through three main strategies to consider when migrating from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online, and also certain things to consider during your migration process. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get started. Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about three main strategies that you could use to migrate from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online. Now, a lot of Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, Fortune 10,000 companies are looking to go ahead and migrate their SharePoint environment from their data center into the cloud to where now their engineers are not responsible for maintaining the SharePoint farm, upgrading the SharePoint farm, patching the SharePoint farm, making sure to disk-space the logs, the backup recovery, disaster recovery, all of that is taken care of. They're migrating to the cloud and offloading all of that infrastructure and farm administration to Microsoft, who arguably is probably best of breed for that type of work, considering they are the creators of the platform. Now, moving to SharePoint Online, understand that there are two main models that you can migrate to. There's SharePoint Classic Online, and then there's SharePoint Modern Online. And what we try to do is, when and where possible, especially once you engage with our consulting firm, is that we will make sure that you're taking advantage, when and where possible, very heavily weighted on the modern SharePoint. The big difference is Classic, and there's pros and cons with both, but for the long term, there's only one winner, absolutely. The biggest difference is that Classic, if you're coming from SharePoint 2010, 2013, even 2016, it's going to be very familiar to your business users and content managers on how SharePoint works, right? So a lot of the button locations and how you interact with lists and libraries are going to be very similar when you go into Classic SharePoint. The problem that you're going to run into is that even though the modern SharePoint is preferred, and one of the reasons why modern SharePoint is preferred is that that is going to be on the evergreen side of the Microsoft platform. And what does that mean? One of the biggest things that SharePoint engineers, architects, farm admins, and alike, they struggle with is the fact that they no longer, and it may come with a breath of fresh air, but they're no longer responsible for the farm, right? Meaning that if the business users are working and they're getting some correlation ID error, there is no sifting through the ULS logs and trying to figure out what broke and troubleshooting all this. That's pretty much offloaded to Microsoft. So you kind of lose a little bit of control in the sense that you're no longer responsible for managing and maintaining the platform. The other piece of that is that you kind of lose that sense of control because you no longer control when new features and capabilities are actually added to the platform. And usually that's a sticking point. But you know, the pros outweigh the cons in this scenario because most engineers or SharePoint admins would be okay with Microsoft managing the ULS logs, the disk space, the performance, the RAM, the CPU, when up, when the size up, when the size wide. They're okay with offloading that piece. The piece that they're not okay with, and it takes some time getting comfortable with it, is new features and capabilities being added to the environment. And one, their business users are more reactive to, oh, here's the new feature. One, how do I use it? Or two, here's the new feature. This kind of breaks our documented process that we're used to with managing content, uploading documents, Most of the features are I don't want to sound like doom and gloom, but most of the features are implemented are not breaking changes. They're really just moving things around. Oh, here's a new capability that wasn't here last week, so on and so forth. So one of the things that the SharePoint admins have to do is to build a communication strategy to where, because these, let me just back up a little bit. These features and capabilities are not surprises. these features and capabilities are documented, sometimes scheduled, but you're getting enough notification ahead of time of when this is going to be available. Not necessarily the exact day and time and when it's going to hit your tenant, but you are made aware that these things are coming. So again, you have to build that communication strategy as a SharePoint admin and architect to get that information out to your content managers sooner than later, so that way you can be proactive, say, hey, this is coming, this is what you can expect. Let's make sure that we're prepared of when this potentially hits our environment. So let's talk about the three main strategies that you have. So here, let me draw your attention to the whiteboard. And from here, let's just say there's three main strategies, and each one of these strategies are going to have their pros and cons. Not really pros and cons, but each one of these strategies, based on the business situation and the business scenario, will determine which one of these three are right for you. So the first strategy is going to be the full migration. And what does this mean? Now, I mentioned that we have both the modern SharePoint and the classic. You want to go modern because modern is going to be on the evergreen. You're going to have a lot of rich functionality and capabilities and web parts that are fresh out of the box, highly functional web parts. Your customization requirement goes almost down to zero, very, very minimal custom footprint. And you're in a position to where a lot of your things are done out of the box. Now, what does that look like from a migration perspective? So here I have this classic site collection on-prem. Let's just call it my 2013 site collection. And I have all of these sub-sites, right, that are going to be part of here. In the modern SharePoint, what you want to do, you want to go pretty much like a flat structure, right? So, and I'll explain what that means here in a little bit. So this flat structure is going to have this whole concept of a hub network. And within the hub network, you're going to have these various site collections and everything else as far as the owner of the site, the members of the site, and the visitor of the site is going to be very similar to what we're used to on-prem. The biggest difference is that with this flat site structure versus this deep hierarchical structure that we used to have in Classic, normally what we would do is take the root, and that would be almost a migration to, okay, this root web that is at the very top of the site collection will become the hub manager or the hub site for the hub network. The sub-sites underneath it would then be elevated or promoted up to their respective site collections. And then this is a business decision. And then I would say this is almost like a case-by-case basis, that in the event one of these sub-sites have even a deeper hierarchical structure, you could either do one or two things. You can take this sub-site structure and mirror that for that particular parent site and represent that same substructure there, or you can do a mix of the two. You can do, okay, this one here should be elevated to its own site collection because though it's at a level 3, it may represent a division or a department that really stands on its own, right? So you can do those types of structures. So, but in the end, the goal is to take all of your classic site structures and hierarchy and subwebs and remap them over as modern sites and modern webs in the hub network. Now, in the next video, we're going to go deep into each one of these strategies, because in each one of these strategies, there's going to be very key sections or hierarchies that, very key sections or categories that you have to account, and there's a strategy for each category. Categories in the sense of information architecture. I have this IA on-prem. How do I map this IA to modern SharePoint? Or even do I map it one for one? Or do I take the spirit of the IA and recreate it with modern tools? You have navigation. Navigation on-prem, most of the time, depending on what navigation strategy you use, if you're using like a managed navigation from the term store, or if you're using a structural navigation where it's automatically created based on the positions of the webs within the site collection, how does that map over to navigation in the modern SharePoint, especially when you're dealing with the hub network? The other questions may run into is, what is my site structure? We kind of talked about this a little bit. How do I take subsite 1, subsite 2, subsite 3? Do I promote those to site collections and map them out that way? Or do I, take, sub 1 and then 1, 1 and 1, 2 and 1, 3 and 1, 4 and maintain that hierarchical structure? So you have to go through all that decision-making process to make sure it's the right choice for the scenario, for the organization within that site collection. Then the other ones, and this is where you get interesting. What about custom web parts? How do I re-customize? Do I rewrite? Is there a magic bullet to make these custom web parts work in modern SharePoint? Or what is my scenario there? And then we talk about security mappings because, what's the site owner on-prem should be a site owner in the cloud for that particular site. Same as what happens if I'm migrating a site owner who no longer exists in AD, right, in Azure Directory, Active Directory on-prem. The migration tool usually will not, especially with ShareGate, which is the #1 tool that we use and highly recommend it. There's no sponsorship for ShareGate. I'm just a huge fanboy about ShareGate because things are simple and easy. And when you have to get complex, there's a PowerScript component of ShareGate to where you can map and do some really fancy things to make things happen. But usually for orphan users, meaning that this user account is an owner or an author or creator for certain content on-prem, what does that mean when that user no longer exists and cannot be migrated to the cloud? What should those be mapped? Like what should we do in those scenarios for those orphan users, right? And then you got branding guidelines and then governance and then a whole set of other fun things that we have to look at. And for each one of these strategies, it's going to be different because each one of these strategies have a different approach. Okay, so that's the full migration. Full migration, again, you're going from classic on-prem to modern online where you're trying to diffuse or get rid of all your classic and you're 100% modern once you migrate it up. Let's talk about the other scenario. The other scenario is going to be a hybrid, right? And what does a hybrid look like? A hybrid, now this is different than what you would see if you did a Google search on hybrid, on-prem, and the cloud. I'm not speaking on, I have a footprint in on-prem and I have another footprint in the cloud and I'm stitching together different services like OneDrive and search to where if I execute a search in the cloud, it searches and finds things on-prem. That's not the hybrid I'm referring to. The hybrid I'm referring to is that, again, you take your classic site here. In my example here, I'm only drawing one site collection, but understand that you can have many site collections, right? This is a farm and you got many site collections within the web app. Just imagine, that's what I'm referring to, even though I may at times only represent one site collection on-prem, right? So I have my on-prem site collection, and this is all classic. But then now what in the hybrid in this sense is that I'm migrating everything, right? Strategy 1 and strategy 2, I'm migrating everything off-prem into the cloud. But once I hit the cloud, I'm going to take on several approaches, right? We talked about once you're in the cloud, you have a fork in the road. You can go SharePoint Classic or SharePoint Modern, and that's what hybrid does. It's going to take up all my site collections on-prem and place them in the cloud, but I may have classic SharePoint site collection in the cloud in addition to one or more modern sites or modern hubs with modern site collections in the cloud to represent my entire footprint on-prem. Again, hybrid, everything has to go. Everything has to get out of the data center, but I have some very complex scenarios on-prem to where it makes sense to do a lift and shift, meaning that this whole site collection and this whole hierarchical structure, I'm gonna just migrate that as is. And usually like with ShareGate or Content Matrix, I can pick that up at the site collection level and just say, map to this site collection. You create, this placeholder in the cloud using the classic site, right? There's certain prerequisites you have to have for this to work, right? You have to be classic site in the cloud. You have to enable custom script in the cloud. Some scenarios you may enable info path forms and SharePoint Designer and But you prime that site collection in the cloud so that way you can do a lift and shift with the understanding that the way it looked and operated on-prem, it will work and look and operate the same in the cloud. Now, and then for the other site collection, I may, again, do a similar strategy to full migration to where I may break this one up and say, you know what, this root is going to be my hub site collection to establish the hub network. This subsite 1 is going to migrate over to a site collection, modern site collection. This subsite 2 is going to migrate to a modern site collection. And for these 2 subs underneath site collection 2, I'm going to go ahead and represent those. But for this subsite, I'm going to go ahead and migrate this one to modern SharePoint in the cloud. Again, picking and choosing and breaking that site collection up, modernizing where I can, subsite structure, leaving those where I can. But for other sites, especially for those heavily custom sites, I'm just moving them like for like and doing a lift and shift. And once it's all said and done, again, everything leaves on-prem, but in the cloud, I create this hybrid because now my intranet is composed of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 classic site collections and 1 or many hub sites and modern sites to make this work. We've seen, especially if you're under a lot of pressure, we've seen scenarios where we wanted to go ahead and modernize the front door. So imagine this, you have a modern home page, or the front door, the main page to represent the intranet. And then from there, you can link off to different classic sites. You can pretty much link off to anywhere you need to link off, right? So let me just show you this example here. So this is a fully managed or a fully modern site that has a hub. And I love the hub navigation or the new global navigation. One, because it's disconnected. And watch this, it's disconnected from the site structure, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And that's another reason why Microsoft is promoting this flat site structure layout, right? Because you have this navigation that if you want to create this hierarchy, you can create this hierarchy where traveling is the main area or section. And then under that, you got corporate card, location, plants, and But each one of these links, this is just hyperlinks, right? It's just text and links. So this text and link could be this could be a third-party application where you can request a corporate card. And, there may be approval and all the other stuff. This may be a classic site that's in the site collection that's not even associated to this hub, right? So you can play tricks like that because the navigation is what creates that superficial hierarchical structure and grouping and not necessarily your site structure. And under the covers or under the hood, it gives you a lot of flexibility now because now you can, from a user perspective, corporate card, right? Corporate card and our plants and booking travel and travel discounts, that is all traveling information, right? I don't care if we're using a third party to manage travel and expense. I don't care if our plant site is a custom web part in a classic site collection. I don't care if the rideshare service is a modern site that has its own site collection and managers, right? But regardless of how those are stored and how those are situated and laid out, the navigation puts it in context and group things together in a meaningful way to where it's easy for me to make heads or tails, and these groupings make sense to me. And again, this is a breath of fresh air because what we were dealing with on-prem, you can achieve this, but you had to fight and jump through several hoops in order to make this happen. All right. So that's going to be, that's how you kind of have that hybrid, and the navigation becomes your saving grace. And yes, using that navigation, you're going to flash different experiences to your end user, but at least, there's either a bookmark of it or, in this scenario, you will see that if I navigate to client engagement, this is a different hub, a different look. Yes, it's a modern site, but I'm using the sweep bar and the logo in the sweep bar to when I click it, it snaps me back to my home page and I feel like I'm ready to rock and roll again, right? And these are tricks that we play with multiple hub strategies, hubs and associated hubs or child hub strategies, a hybrid scenario where you got a hub and a classic site, a general intranet network where you got a hub, classic site, links to a whole bunch of third parties, but it all comes together and it all works together for, in the end, for the good. All right, let's talk about the third strategy, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up this video, and we'll talk about what's next in this series. So the third strategy is going to be incremental, right? So what incremental means that I am going to have a footprint on-prem and a footprint in the cloud, right? And the goal is I'm going to take my time and migrate in an incremental fashion to SharePoint Online. But what the goal is, once I finish my incremental migration, and this could be a course over 12 to 18 months. I mean, it really depends on how big your intranet is, how many different departments and organizations and groups that you have to interact with, make sure they're ready to move to the cloud, get them trained up to start using the cloud. That's what the incremental is really, really great for, right? It's like we have a huge elephant to chew up and digest. Let's do this one bite at a time. And then over a course of 12, 18, 24 months, we would be completely off-prem. We can shut down, decommission those servers. And now we're riding high with SharePoint Online, right? So again, this is going to be where I got a massive footprint on-prem, right? I got, these are my different site collections. I may have one or many web apps with the understanding I got multiple web apps. I may have multilingual scenarios to where, I'm supporting multiple languages. I got a site collection that has variations enabled that's supporting multiple languages. I mean, this is going to be really the very large organizations, the Fortune 500s, to where you got 10, 20, 50, 100,000 users, and you just incrementally migrating them to the cloud. There are a lot of, I understand strategy 3. Strategy 3 is probably one of the most painful to experience during this transition, especially when the majority is still on cloud. Still on-prem. So wherever the majority is, right? Because, just look at your incrementals, just going to go in waves, right? So to speak. So initially, you're going to be 90% on-prem. Wave 1 maybe 10% in the cloud. And usually this wave 1 looks something similar to this. You will find the main site collection that represents your intranet. And to get everyone excited, what you do is migrate the main homepage, right? You're going to have custom applications that you still interact with. You're going to build up this global hub navigation. And again, I'm very flexible here. I can link to a custom app on-prem. I can link to a third party using SSO to really streamline that experience. I can link to other accelerated sites, modern sites that accelerated their migration from on-prem to the cloud. I can bring all that together with this hub navigation, right? I'm not too concerned with that. Now, what that usually means that if I have the hub navigation that's linking to some on-prem sites, as well as some modern sites, as well as some third-party sites, I usually would have to, whatever navigation that we're using on-prem to kind of stitch these multiple site collections together, I'm mirroring that navigation with my hub navigation just from a user perspective, right? So usually if you have a global navigation strategy across multiple site collections, you're probably either one using a term store or maybe a custom navigation that's list driven or whatever the case may be, right? Because now you're out of the scope of a single site collection. You almost have to go broad scope to make that happen. And because of that, you get the same flexibility that we have with the hub, right? It's just links and text, right? So you're using the text to structure and organize in a meaningful way. But the key is to keep both of those navigations in sync. Do you have to write something custom to keep them in sync? I think that's heavy-handed. I think it's just have someone who's managing, or a team of people who are managing the navigation. When the site moves from on-prem to the cloud, they update the link in the cloud for that nav, update the link on-prem for that global nav, and then it's done, right? So this one, again, I understand why it is. It's painful. It's a painful transition. It seemed like it takes forever. But the good news is you're going to get a framework in place, right, to where this is how we move a site from on-prem to the cloud. This is how we engage those business users from on-prem to the cloud. These are the steps that we take. Here's our communication templates and process. So it's a very well-defined process once you get past that, the one or two first few batches, right? Again, depending on the size of the footprint, it could take some time. I mean, I seen them go 24 months. I seen them, 3 years maybe. Again, you're talking hundreds of thousands of employees across 20, 30 countries with, supporting 10, 12 languages. And each one of these business units, I mean, their day-to-day doesn't stop just for the fact that we're migrating. So sometimes it's a hurry up and wait to where you engage a business and they say, we have this huge project on the way. We can't afford to allow these sites to move right now. But once our project, that's when your project manager or program manager starts to negotiate, because they need a window after they complete, whatever they got going on to say, okay, here's a window of time we can do this, get everybody migrated, get everybody trained up, you get a shutdown archive process in place, so on and so forth. But yeah, so that's going to be the incremental. And again, the incremental is really meant to do things in a more predictable, repeatable fashion. It's a more slower drip to get to the cloud, but you kick it off with a big bang, usually the homepage and the news and the events, everything that, that one page that everyone goes to get information, or that one page that's the default when they open up their browser. That's usually the site that goes first. It gets everyone excited, and that could be a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it could be you get everyone excited. Now the business users are knocking on the door like, we're ready, let's go. This is way better than what we're experiencing on-prem. And some of your developers like, I'm tired of supporting this custom solution we got on-prem. Let's go. We're ready. Let's go ahead and get this in line. Okay, so let's talk about next steps. In this series, what I wanted to do is to go through each one of the three and those different categories that I highlighted before. Again, those categories are information architecture. What does that mean if you're doing hybrid or incremental or full migration? The navigation, what does that mean for across these three strategies? The site structure in the hub, the business applications, your business applications. I failed to mention that. Let's talk about in the future video with the business applications, what does that mean when you have Nintex forms or K2 forms and apps and on-prem or custom forms, InfoPath forms, SharePoint Designer workflows, and SharePoint Designer 2010 and 2013 and Nintex work? How does all of that work during the migration? How do those work together for each one of these three scenarios, right? So we're gonna get into each one of these and dig deep and talk about the pros and cons and some of the gotchas to watch out for. And then we talk about security. What is your branding strategy, right? What is your branding strategy when you're hybrid? I got one that's modern and I have one that's classic. They both are in the cloud, but how do I brand? How do I minimize that flash that I talked about when you're doing a hybrid approach? And then the same is true for incremental. What is the branding strategy for incremental, and what do you have to your disposal to make that happen? Customization is going to be another very interesting conversation. There was a very interesting strategy around it, right? Just because, now let me just give this one fair warning and level set with this. Just because we customize web parts on-prem does not necessarily mean we have to customize the same web part in the cloud, right? And what does that mean? And we'll talk about that. That's one of the key pieces that you want to do, because I think a lot of SharePoint developers are in the mindset of my worth or my value add to this department is the fact that I can custom create web parts. Well, does that go away? And if that goes away, what does the new thing look like, right? Especially if you cannot achieve the same out of the box, right? What should be the mindset and the strategy to go from custom web parts on-prem to achieving that same functionality in the cloud? A very interesting conversation to have. And then lastly, and I think the one, and I don't know if these are in order, but lastly, the governance is going to be, the last piece is going to be governance, right? What is the governance with SharePoint Online in general? Because it's different. There's different roles and responsibilities in the cloud around SharePoint compared to on-prem, right? Because let me just give you this other thought. Let me just give you this one last thought, and then we'll wrap it up. Understand this: if you are in, watch this, if you are in the cloud, if you're on-prem, SharePoint is the only technology that you have for a lot of things that you want to achieve. But for those same activities, business activities, and I'll give you some examples here in a second. For those same activities, you have best of breed workloads in the Microsoft 365 cloud. Notice the terminology switch. I didn't say SharePoint Online. I said the Microsoft 365 cloud. So what does that mean? So an example of this is that on-prem, your site collection does many things. It has a communication portal. It has a news hub. It has sites for departments to represent the departments to the organization. It has internal department sites, meaning that like HR payroll, that's a HR department. They have a site, but only the people in payroll have access to that site. So you have that type of activity. You have project management on-prem. You have different communities and collaboration sites. You have different organization or special interest group sites, all within SharePoint. Like all this activity is wrapped inside of SharePoint proper. Now, when you go to the Microsoft 365 cloud, SharePoint Online only represents some of those. But now you have Microsoft Teams that represents another set. And you have Yammer that represents another set, right? And you got Planner and other things that you could do inside of Teams that represents a totally different set. So sometimes your migration, especially if you're looking at full and incremental, may not be this project SharePoint site migrates to a modern SharePoint site. It may be a scenario where this project site migrates to Teams, right? So you may run into those scenarios. So we're going to talk through all of that, different sites, different activities, and what's the best of breed in the Microsoft 365 cloud to handle that. Now, I listed out a whole bunch. Use the comment section to, out of those different categories, and you may have to rewind this video and capture them, which one do you would like to see in the next video? That's the benefit of watching this drip video series, right? Which one of those topics would you like to see next? Which one of these topics that you're working with now in your organization, in your department, that says, oh, I need Deshaun's opinion on how to handle X, right? What's your experience with this? And if you have any poignant scenarios or questions or how-tos or what's the best strategy or different opinion on something, leave it in the chat and the majority wins. Or if there's very little feedback, I'm gonna just take it by order of who's commenting. So, as soon as you can comment and put your, this is an opportunity for you to get selfish, right? To get something answered. Go ahead and put it in the comment, and I will make a video of it. If not the next video, the video after that. All right. See you in the comment section. Absolutely see you in the next video for this particular series. As always, if there are any other questions besides the preference, leave it in the comment section. Until then, I'll chat with you soon.